The critic Clement Greenberg advocated for limits in art. It's funny because we think of art as being totally free. In art, you can do whatever you want. That's why it's better than life. As for me, I don't want limits in my paintings. I want to be free. I don't consider myself as having a fixed system or methodology for painting. Same for content. I rarely seem to have a finished subject, idea, or mental picture in mind before making a mark. For me, how the painting is made becomes what the painting eventually is about. In this way, my work de-emphasizes intellect, or the head, in favor of other source entities, mysterious and indescribable, but often referred to with words such as heart, soul, even body. Body language. It's hard to describe, but here's what happens. Sometimes I see lines that branch like a Y or a lambda overlaid on the form of the air. These lines pull on space. My body is always in tension, relating itself to these letters or lines or branches, which I should say also appear as ruts or holes in the surface of space. So, in essence, the space is divided by floating tree branches. They are floating, rotating, all dancing with one another. Here's the challenge. You have to hold them, but also know how to let them spin, or go about their intended movement without your intervention. All of this visual spinning can be disorienting, but you can't let yourself fall over or trip on your feet. You have to exert a certain amount of control over yourself and these emerging edges. It helps to make yourself stand up straight. Down through the ages, humans have developed many ways of understanding the body, but the total adherence to any one of these methods to the detriment of others limits our understanding of the whole reality. A grasp of the Hindu meditation focal points known as chakras can be helpful. Such Indian traditions hold that human life simultaneously exists in two parallel dimensions, one physical body, and another psychological, emotional, mind, non-physical, called the subtle body. They say the chakra of the neck becomes blocked when we cannot speak our truths, and standing up straight can help open it up. If you sing in a choir, they will tell you the same thing. If you want to open up your throat to sing, stand up straight. Certain voices are loud when they implore you to stand up straight. And of course, bad posture is an affliction with damaging physical consequences. But the mantra stand up straight, as a moral imperative, suffers from not knowing enough. What you will learn from a good choral instructor is not only to keep your head from tilting up when you sing, but also to tighten your ass. Robert Beverly Hale, instructor of anatomical and proportional drawing at the Art Students League in the 60s, concurred. To stand up straight, he said, collect the fibers of gluteus maximus. But of course, the aim of life is not always to be a tight ass. Sometimes things have to be looser. You have to check in with your asshole. And if you have back or neck problems, stand up straight. I'm not a doctor, but I do know that Shakespeare's English was written with a hunch that could tune in to the rhythm and cadence, the swelling and beating of your heart. And this is why we hunch. To protect our hearts by the concavity of our backs from the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, and to nurse its woundedness sometimes, and also to channel it, to get in touch with it and the physicality of our bodies which it can possess. The horror of mimesis. In his essay, The Horror of Mimesis, David Young Kim explores the trend that began in the Renaissance of dissecting corpses in order not only to further an anatomical understanding of the human body, but also to conceive of a realistic, representational, or mimetic style of painting. Kim discusses The Head of Medusa by an unknown Flemish artist, which shows the severed head of the mythological woman. The work reflects both the thorough knowledge of human anatomy and also the horror of the dissection which made this knowledge possible. Later, around 1617, Rubens, possibly after viewing Caravaggio's rendering, itself perhaps inspired by a lost Da Vinci, took up the Medusa subject as well. Ever since, art historians have interpreted such a severing of head and body in oppositional terms, i.e., intellect versus soul, brain versus heart, etc. Perseus, Medusa's killer, was viewed by some as a triumphant intellect that vanquished base, low, carnal desires embodied in the woman's tangled serpent hair. What is often left out of these interpretations is that Medusa herself gave her hair its stone-killing properties after having been raped by the god Neptune. In her rage, the beautiful daughter of Phorcys turned her most alluring asset into a means of destroying those that would admire her for it. In this way, men would suffer as she had for their own base, carnal motivations. If she had been figuratively turned to stone by her sexual ordeal, then they would be literally stoned. But I digress, intellectually. Dissection. Kant thought what we knew was given a priori, which means before, but he also thought we learned things a posteriori, which means after. His noble science would agree. Both are true. We take after when it's tested by a scientific method, and all we know before is owed to a pre-planned genetic code. In the 18th century, Hume wrote treatises which turned a skeptic eye on any kind of knowing a priori. His ideas became the groundwork for science and secularism, or the pursuit of learning through observing nature. At the time, they had developed new ways of studying nature too. As a painter, I'm drawn to the subject of dissection, and what we today call the dichotomies of the mind and the body. By removing one from the other, the head of Medusa displays the most literal separation, and it therefore is the easiest to understand. Many works that speak to me touch on this same subject, and in so doing broaden the effect until I begin to see head-heart dichotomies in just about all art. In my view, however, one, heart, precedes the other, head. One is a priori, the other a posteriori. One involves making, the other interpreting. Further, my purpose is not to reject this great dissection outright, but to call attention to the head-over-heart approach as it exists in the current art landscape, and to suggest that it in the end extols art that exists in a world separate from other human beings and separate from the body that makes up all of us and that we all share here on earth. The Anatomy Lesson. In W.G. Sebald's book, The Rings of Saturn, an unnamed narrator describes Rembrandt van Rijn's The Anatomy Lesson of Dr. Nicolaas Tulp. The narrator points out that the group of men are looking not at the body of the corpse that the physician has dissected, but at the medical textbook in the lower right corner of the painting. In this way, the body has vanished completely under the dissection, and the words that accompany them. William Heckscher, in his examination of Rembrandt's anatomy lesson, distinguishes between two kinds of light that exist within the painting. First is the hidden words of the book, which elucidate or explain the dissection to the medical onlookers. The other is the light coming off the corpse, which illuminates the trauma of the dissected body. The question becomes, could there be elucidation and illumination in a way that does not vanish the body? Can light coexist with form? I think so. Lots of both in equal measure. A short history. Beginning in the 1940s, the art of the avant-garde in America began approaching pure abstraction. In his essay, Towards a Newer Laocoon, Clement Greenberg, the critic spokesperson for the group of artists that would become known as the Abstract Expressionists, saw the development towards total non-objective art as painting's declaration that its deepest concern spoke to form. Form was geometric, hard-edged, but also soft and sensuous. The divide between the two opposing camps was real. Newman painted painfully straight lines, while de Kooning gave in to his basest carnal desires without a worry. Was there a division here between the head and the body? Not quite an anatomical rendering anymore, but still a kind of severing of the body from the head. A dissection, in the strictest sense of the word, means two-part division. Although abstract expressionism had replaced the representational styles of European painting, the old tendencies to sever remained. In order to stomach the horror of the autopsy, one effectively had to remove all sensation and become an isolated brain with a mechanical eye and hand, effectively a bodiless head. The Europeans used their severed head, akin to the one end, the head of Medusa, as a powerful tool of clinical examination. And beginning in the 1500s, Europeans began dissecting other bodies, not just dead ones, through imperialism and colonization. And the same was true for the abstract expressionists. By and large, they separated the abstract from the expressive, largely in an effort to reflect the continued importance and power of America as an imperialist force capable of exerting its ability to clinically incise where it wanted to in the world. Read the body. Some artists, like Rothko or Pollock, went a little further. Their use of shape and line, respectively combined with a shared gestural method, attempted to free themselves of subjecthood altogether. In Beware the Tragic Sublime, Gwenaël Kerledu describes how Rothko confronted the tragic question of sublimating the self, and eventually his paintings became the figure by itself, each painting a body pressed not only up against the picture plane, but also all the way out to the far edges and to the corners. With every inch of the canvas body, there was no air, no space for the viewer to escape, and so the paintings possessed their audience by their pure tragedy. Pollock went where even Rothko dared not to go, all the way into pure non-subjectivity. He lost himself in a world where he was not himself and could take no one with him. His marks never flowed past the edge of the canvas. He wouldn't let anyone in. Although he tried to be free of the outside world, the consequences for not being responsible in his life still found their way in. That is, when he smashed bottles on his canvas and then walked over the surface, barefoot, he still wound up with glass in his feet. Greenberg's ultimate goal was to establish limitations between medium specificity, which is a technical term for a notion that art is defined by its medium. In Greenberg's world, painting was tied to a certain tradition, or certain stories which we tell ourselves about painting. It uses paint, usually oil, on a rectangular canvas with some kind of support which can hang on a wall. Greenberg thought abstract expressionism's value came from its historical precedent. In the post-World War II decade, the American avant-garde felt itself responsible for the whole history of European painting. But now it was free of its subject, the metaphorical part which related it back to the pre-war, Eurocentric world we knew. It was no longer about representation, although there was still a separation, a dissection. The great thing about abstract expressionism was how far it took art in either direction. We learned a lot. Did the abstract expressionists need to martyr themselves for this newfound awareness? No one asked them to do it. They wanted to, and they taught us something new, something about the body. We had already learned a great deal about the mental games of abstraction from the early proponents of synthetic cubism, but where we hadn't landed was that touch could exist as a means of exploration as well. To Pollock and Rothko, touch meant being attentive to the physical sensations that the medium itself allowed. They felt things in their bodies, although their bodies were separate or longed to be separate from the external world. Greenberg advocated for a new conception of limits in medium specificity, so that painting could remain separate. But Greenberg's call for limitations was a death knell for specificity. The developments in painting that Pollock and company shared with the world could not be held back by boundaries between mediums. The body could express itself in new ways, revolting against dissection and celebrating the joy of touch. But with dissection, did they also subvert the head altogether? Did the body art of the 1960s sap the power of the head, only to discard it, choosing instead to live life in Sleepy Hollow? Not so sleepy. Looks like a party to me. I'm game. Personally, body art always makes me more aware of my gaze. The male gaze specifically. Like, looks like a party to me, and I'm game. But the beauty or message of body art comes as a direct reaction to the action painters of the previous decades, in that it forefronts subjectivity rather than diminishing or trying to be free of it. Subjectivity, your subjectivity, my subjectivity, became about creating an awareness of my gaze looking at your exposed body, and maybe you at mine. I cannot dissect the body of Carolee Schneemann in Fresh Blood, A Dream Morphology. If I want to look at her in a way that denies my subjectivity, and therefore hers, I would have to think about another way for my eye to interact with her body, a way that does not reduce the figure to lifeless abstraction, or selfish emotional expression. I don't think body art was all about the body. It was about the eye too, the looking at the body which sends the viewer on a mental trip through the politics of his eye. If there is a separation at all, it's that there is a lot of work to do in confronting, perhaps diverting, perhaps transforming the gaze altogether. But the message is optimistic. If we work at it, maybe we can learn how body art can coexist with the gaze, and come to some synthesis between seemingly disparate subjective personas, and in this way emerge in a new kind of liberation within subjectivity. Is that a paradox? In the late 1960s, art existed in a culture of optimism, perhaps in part due to the promise of a new gaze, a new way of looking and making paintings. The 1970s arrived with the surge in experimental deconstructing and rethinking of painting. Artists began considering the structures behind the painting, that is, the support which held the canvas together and allowed it to hang on a wall. Behind the experimentation was a sense of doubt in the ability for a painting to support itself amid the structures of the broader cultural landscape. The painting desperately wanted to exist outside of the economic structures which tethered painting to the past. The doubt in the security of artists living in a social situation which might not have a place for them eventually extended to the idealistic vision of the movement itself. Artists in the seminal exhibition High Times and Hard Times, New York Painting 1967 to 1975, took their paintings apart and put them back together. But by the late 1970s, many painters had returned to the easel. But, as a mechanic might tell you, if you take apart the machine and put it back together, you might learn something about how it works. I believe there are ways of making paintings which can borrow ideas from the experimental body art of the 1970s, but exist in or provide for a shared world of painting. Of course, the economic structures within which we exist are flawed and need changing, but perhaps there are ways to create paintings which could support a more responsible gaze, while at the same time loving and providing that sense of touch, that connection. We want to share moments with people who like to look at our paintings. We want to bring people together in a way that provides for subjectivity, but also its opposite, not being bound to ourselves. Sometimes people are too wrapped up in their own worlds, and who can blame them? Ideally, money is the agent which binds us morally to each other. I am responsible to you, you are responsible to me. And with this premise, human beings have built economic systems which ideally are capable of supporting people. Jobs, selling our labor. We start to question a system we have created when it no longer can support people. The idea in the 1970s, High Times and Hard Times, was that the old means of support in a painting, the stretcher bars, had to change in order to provide for a vision of freedom, of free love, of being able to look at the same time, not abstractly, not possessively, and not conservatively, but responsibly, at Carolee Schneeman's body. The economic system we live with, money, is not only a gauge of morality, but crucially of religion. We have faith in a system that provides for us, but religion is not only about getting, it's also about giving. We have a certain debt to other people. Personally, I believe it's no small coincidence that we spell doubt and debt so similarly. I think there's a strong association between these words in our minds. America has so much debt. How could it ever reasonably be paid? With what economy? Today we don't believe in debt. We can't because the economic system that supports us could never pay it back. We don't believe in the debt that we have to other people anymore, as represented by the economy. In a symbolic way, not in a real way, that was the COVID-19 pandemic. We wanted to go home, work from home, because we couldn't stand being in the institutional sites which constantly reminded us of the impossible debt that we owe. It's a connection that I have been drawing through COVID-19. We've all been making connections as we're coming to terms with how soulless work is with massive piling debt and a system that does not even provide for its people. I'm not saying that America is ever going to pay off its debt. I don't think it will. But the solution, as we tentatively begin sticking our toes into the water of normal life again, and our economy starts up again, is not shying away from this debt, not challenging it with conspiratorial claims about the standard which supports the system, where'd all the gold go? Rather, taking on the mantle of debt, of work which you owe to the world, work you know you owe to the world because it would make it a better place, but not in a dissecting way, in a responsible way. This is the decision to transform pain into something else, into joy, no, rather fiery burning love. Doubt it. You can't fault someone for trying to escape a world they didn't ask to enter and in which they have to sell their labor at McDonald's to survive. Dismantling our economic system would mean going deeper into our psyche. Money has a deep history, old stories which have currency, still today. Is the point to learn about these stories and question them in order to see what we could change? I'm wary of dissection, but if it means the freedom from having to work a job, no, that's selfish, but I can't help wondering if there's something in even just looking at the stories we tell ourselves, specifically about faith, or economically speaking, our investment in other people. Would it be too much, too painful to dissect these stories? Stories are made up of language. Perhaps a certain amount of words are necessary around a painting, or in a painting. And we think of language emerging from the thoughts in our head, but what happens when the body expresses itself in thought, or the mind in feeling? Europe. Europeans had an idea of beauty, or joy, or paradise, which caused them to justify their violence. To them, the pursuit of knowledge and the beautification of their clothes and cities was worth the horrors which they unleashed on the world. Their painting is beautiful, but was it worth it? Do we think of representational painting as progress? And if so, is that progress worth violence? Are there other ways to progress? As it stands, we find ways of tolerating a world that has its share of beauty, its share of joy, and its share of cruelty. Do we want to take a chance on change? Are we worried that the result of change would be more suffering? We need to find a solution for living together, that's for sure, but also living in our imaginations. And we need some kind of measure for violence, pain, suffering, some way of gauging when it gets to be too much. And of course, our ideas about punishment aren't working. I hope that I can say that I want above all else for there not to be violence, pain, or suffering employed in response to pain. Can I say that? It's not an easy point to make. I think justice's truth can get called into question when it employs too much pain in retribution. William Blake wrote about a character from his visions called Urizen, who enslaved himself to the idea of enslaving people. He had a book of brass in which he wrote, quote, "Laws of peace, of love, of unity, of pity, compassion, forgiveness, let each choose one habitation, his ancient infinite mansion. One command, one joy, one desire, one curse, one weight, one measure, one king, one God, one law."